Hey, Assalamu alaikum. Let's understand about the more glucose intake, the more sugar, to more chances of the cancer. How it is possible? Let's understand about that. For example, whenever you will refine sugar or hidden sugar in the form of starch, whenever you will eat, so in this way that will spike the insulin. When spike the insulin, in this way the all glucose will enter into the tissue, and in this way the glucose will increase. The number of the molecule in the cell will increase the glucose, and increase the number of glucose will lead to progress the glycolysis first, and the glycolysis to produce more ATP, and no need to further progress the ATP, and in this way the rich amount of the ATP will inhibit the oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria. But remember about that thing, that basically the high level of the glucose in the blood will lead to oxidize the low density lipoprotein. So the oxidation will lead to create the reactive oxygen species, will damage the mitochondria, damage the cell, damage the DNA of the cell, will lead to activate the oncogenes. That oncogene basically in the mitochondria and the dysfunction of the mitochondria due to the beta oxidation inhibition, while the glycolysis progress to produce more ATP, and that ATP will use for the several function. But in this way the electron transport chain will not work, because the beta oxidation required for the electron transport chain, and in this way the fat will not use, while the glucose will use due to the overconsumption of the glucose, will trigger the energy rich condition inside of the cell due to the spike of the insulin. So in this way the growth hormone will inhibit, while the increase the insulin spike, and in this way increase of the insulin spike will allow the glucose move into the cell, and in this way the energy rich condition will trigger the mTOR pathway, and the mTOR pathway is very important to progress and proliferation differentiation of the damaged cell, the damaged mitochondrial cell, the damaged DNA containing cell. mTOR pathway will not apoptosis and recycle the cell if the damaged cell, but the mTOR pathway is important, and in this way mTOR pathway you should inhibit the mTOR pathway in several times. Not mTOR pathway is not bad, but mTOR pathway should be triggered after the exercise, but every time mTOR pathway by the consumption of the glucose is not good. So anyhow, the mTOR pathway basically proliferate the damaged cell, while the energy deprivation condition due to the fasting, due to the ketogenic diet, and due to the exercise, caloric restriction, and the sleep will buffer the insulin, and in this way the energy starvation condition will occur within the cell. That is the shock of the energy starvation. In this way the ATP will decline, will trigger the AMPK pathway. This AMPK pathway will correct the mitochondria, correct the DNA. If the DNA is more damaged, so the cell will recycle. It means the cell will apoptose, and in this way the cell will basically recycle due to the AMPK pathway, because the energy is not producing. So the incorrect DNA containing cell basically will recycle, while the healthy cell will maintain, their life will be increased. So the AMPK pathway is very important, which that maintain the healthy cell, while the damaged cell will be recycled. While the mTOR pathway basically not censor of the damaged cell or the healthy cell, it will proliferate and differentiate. So the mTOR pathway basically not inhibit the damaged cell and not recycle, it will grow. So in this the mTOR pathway will inhibit due to the ketogenic diet, exercise, and the caloric restriction diet, as well as sleep. On the other hand, the AMPK pathway is the energy starvation condition activation protein, which that also trigger the PGC1 alpha. The PGC1 alpha is very important for the mitochondrial biogenesis. A lot more other genes activation due to the starvation shock, like the SIRT1 gene activation. This SIRT1 gene activation will lead to maintain the DNA, correct the DNA, healthy cell will maintain, while on the other hand it is the shock response. For example, the shock resistant protein production due to the certain type of genes like SIRT1 gene activation. That gene basically combat the shock and in this way the proliferation and the maintain of the healthy cell while the damaged cell will be recycled. That is the process, and in this way our consumption of the glucose will not trigger the AMPK pathway. When not trigger the AMPK pathway, so the damaged cell also proliferate due to the energy rich condition trigger the mTOR pathway, and the mTOR pathway basically also proliferate the cancer cell and the damaged cell. In this way the damaged cell will proliferate, will lead to cause oncogene activation. Due to the uncontrolled proliferation of the cell will lead to cause tumor, and this tumorigenesis, the process of the tumor formation, will lead to progress, and in this way the hypoxic condition will occur due to the glucose metabolism will work and the glycolysis work for production of too much ATP, but the electron transport chain will not work because the mitochondria will be damaged and the AMPK pathway is not activating, and in this way the process is very bad, and in this way the AMPK pathway will not activate. So in this way the how to correct the DNA, how to correct the everything, how to recycle the DNA, how to recycle the cell, that is the difficult thing. And in this way the mTOR pathway basically triggered due to the rich amount of the ATP, and the mTOR pathway will prepare and proliferate the damaged cell, even will lead to cause oncogene activation. Remember, the AMPK pathway is very important to trigger for the sensation of the damaged cell or healthy cell. If the healthy cell so live longer, while the damaged cell will be recycled. In this way, your body will hold clean due to the fasting, due to the ketogenic diet and caloric restriction, and due to the more and more thing is that the sleep, the good sleep will also buffer the insulin. Basically the story behind that, the insulin buffering. So whenever you will not intake the glucose, so the insulin will buffer, not more glucose enter into the cell, not more production of ATP through glycolysis, and not basically the damaged cell. The damaged cell, not basically damaged cell contain damaged mitochondria will not proliferate because the electron transport chain is required in the energy deprivation condition rather than the energy rich condition, and in this way your mitochondria will function for those mitochondria which that is healthy, and the glycolysis to pyruvate to further progression, electron transport chain will work to produce more ATP through oxygen using, and in this way the healthy mitochondria will maintain while the energy is very less. So if the mitochondria basically not working properly, so the recycling is very important. In this way the autophagy will occur. This autophagy triggered due to the exercise, due to the caloric restriction, due to the fasting and sleep, as well as exercise and too much ketogenic diet, which that is too much important. So I hope you make sense about that. Whenever you will not intake the glucose, so you will basically trigger the caloric restriction. So in this way, the caloric restriction basically increase the PGC1 alpha, which that prepare and recover the mitochondria, while the AMPK pathway activation, SIRT1 gene activation will need to prepare and reverse the damaged cell, and in this way if the too much damaged cell will basically recycle, while the mTOR pathway you are triggering by the using of the more carbohydrate, which that will lead to cause cancer. So why some people not get the cancer to eat more and more glucose, more and more carbohydrate? Because their genetic is more efficiently working, but everyone basically not face this activity, and basically the cancer is also genetic. Remember about that. On the other hand, the mitochondrial genetic, the cancer is the mitochondrial genetic because the mitochondria damage, the electron transport chain will damage. On the other hand, the too much energy production via glycolysis, but not beta oxidation, not basically you are not fasting, not triggering the beta oxidation, not production of ketones, which that all these things require the oxygen. So you are not giving the oxygen chance to oxygen consuming process, but you are aerobically not working, but anaerobic fermentation triggered due to the too much carbohydrate consumption will lead to cause cancer. This is the short story about the cancer, how you can prevent that cancer. That is the simple to understand, not any complexity. Don't use the carbohydrate part. Ketogenic diet, exercise, fasting and caloric restriction, good sleep, while the all essential minerals and vitamin is very important for the normal function of the mitochondria, like the magnesium, zinc, potassium, sodium, and the chlorine. That is all these things basically important electrolyte for normal function. On the other hand, the buffering of the insulin, which that is due to the restriction of the carbohydrate, that is all these things is important. I hope you make sense about that. Basically the four things you can reverse that, even the reverse the aging, because aging also occur due to the more glucose consumption to produce more glycolysis in this way. Also the oxidation of the low density lipoprotein in the blood will lead to cause inflammation due to the more reactive oxygen species production, which that kill the endothelial cell and damage the endothelial cell due to the reactive oxygen species increase. For the suppression of the reactive oxygen species, you can use the antioxidant like green vegetable and the on the other hand the amino acid containing diet, but less, while the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acid itself is the antioxidant. Progress the ketogenic diet to keto adaptation itself is the antioxidant and produce the energy efficiently as compared to the glucose. See in the next video. For this time, bye. Allah Hafiz.